Alright, so Unit 18 deals with conic sections. Okay, conic sections, which is just basically if I had this double-ended looking cone, so two cones stacked on top of each other, and I were to bisect it, for instance, if I were to bisect it directly in half, well, what I would end up with is this perfect little circle for a plane, so I get circles. Okay, if I were to go at a little bit of an angle, well, now it's not going to be a circle, it's going to be a little oblong looking, so you're going to end up with what we call an ellipse, and we'll look at those next. Okay, you can also, if I bisected it through the base and through one of the cones, well, this part right here is going to give me a parabola. And then you have the very last one is if I bisected it through the edge of both cones, well, then I basically get, because this is going to give a little flat spot, so I'm going to end up with a hyperbola, which looks something like this, because it's going to bisect here and be rounded, and then bisect here and be rounded. Okay, so that's your four different conic sections. You have a circle, an ellipse, a hyperbola, and a parabola. Okay, those are your four conic sections. Now we're going to start with the circle because it's the simplest. Okay, it is the simplest because it is the exact same distance from the center to the end of to the edge of the circle all the way around, hence the word circle. So, the equation of a circle in what we call vertex form. Okay, this is vertex form, so it's going to be x minus h squared plus y minus k squared equals r squared. Okay, so the way that we can identify a circle, and it'll be easier once you start to learn all the other equations, but circles are going to have a plus. They're x squared and is y is squared. Both of them are going to be squared, and it's going to be equal to r squared, so you're not going to have different numbers underneath these, whereas when you get to ellipse, you'll have another number underneath x and another number underneath y. Okay, but we'll get there eventually. So for the circles, we just need squaring on x and y, and we need it to be equal to r squared. And the big part here is the plus in between. Okay, if there's a minus in between, that's something different. Now, if we have h, k is my center point. Center point, so looking over here at our diagram, this would be my hk, which is the exact center. And r, of course, is radius, which is from the middle to the outside. Now that's important. It's from the center to the outside. Keep that in mind. That's something you should already know, but keep that in mind as we go through today. Now we also have two other equations that we need. All of these equations will be given to you on the test, so that's kind of nice. But I've got the distance formula, which I have to be able to use. Okay, and we will use that to find the distance from the middle to the outside. So that's going to be our radius is what we use that for. The distance formula. And midpoint is going to be if they give me two outside points and I want to find the middle to find the center. So we use midpoint formula to find the center point. Okay, so we will use those two formulas where we'll find our x and y values and plug them in. Now the two things that you need to not only write an equation but graph a circle, you have to have the center point and you have to have the radius. Okay, those two things are essential. You can't do anything without them. So if you don't have both of them, then you're going to have to use either the distance or the midpoint formula to find center and radius. Okay, so when we start by looking at different equations and pulling out information. Okay, so if you look right here, you have to imagine that my formula says x minus h squared plus y minus k squared equals r squared. Well, when you look here, this is just x squared. So your h here doesn't exist. So it's 0. Okay, because I could rewrite this to say x minus 0 squared and it's still the same thing. So I get 0 there. Same thing here. Y squared, the k has to be 0. Y minus 0 squared to get y squared. So my center point is just at 0, 0. Okay, this is the most simple form. I've got x squared plus y squared. So I haven't moved anywhere. So it starts at 0, 0, right in the middle of our graph. Okay, now the radius. A lot of people want to write 4, but that's not true. The formula says that r squared equals 4. Well, if r squared is 4, then the square root of that would give me r. So r is actually 2. So I have a radius of 2 for my 0, 0. So now if I want to graph it, I start with my center at 0, 0. and then just draw a radius of 2. So it's going to be 2 in every direction. So 2 to the right, 2 to the left, 2 to the top, 2 to the bottom. Okay, if I wanted to, I could try to go out 2, but be careful. Don't go 2 diagonal. That's very different. Okay, 2 diagonally is very different. So up, down, left, and right, draw your circle. It is important that you try to make it look like you at least attempted to make a circle. They won't be perfect, and that's fine, but it should look like you attempted to make a circle, okay? Just make sure it's not a straight little diamond. Alright, so example 2, same sort of idea. Okay, so we're looking at that same thing. X minus h squared plus y minus k squared equals r squared. Well, here, this is kind of easy. It lines up perfectly. X minus h. So h here is the 3. Notice this says x minus 3, but I'm going to use positive 3 as my center because the minus comes with the formula. Okay? So the h is actually 3. So here, my formula says y minus k. This is y plus 2. So realistically, that's the same thing as saying y minus negative 2 squared. So my k value is actually then negative 2. Okay? So, that's where those actually come from, but the easy way to remember it is you just change signs. X is positive 3, y is negative 2. It's just going to change signs when you pull it out of the equation. Now, same thing with the radius here. This is my r squared. So if r squared equals 8, that makes r equal to the square root of 8. So I get the square root of 8 there. Okay? And when I graph that, I am going to use the approximate. So approximate the square root of 8 rather is approximately, got my numbers all mixed up here, so approximately 2.8. So now if I want to graph, how do you graph 2.8? Very simple. Start with your center point, 3, negative 2. Okay, graph your center point, and then 2.8. The big part is that I'm looking for is it's almost 3. It's not quite 3 though. So when you go from your center, you're going to go 1, 2, almost 3, but not quite. Same thing in the other direction. So we've got 1, 2, almost 3, but not quite. So we're not quite to the axis yet. Same thing going up, 1, 2, almost 3. So it should be above the x-axis. And down, 1, 2, almost 3. Graph that point. Okay, and as long as it's relatively close, then that is going to be sufficient. Draw your circle. Again, don't just connect the dots. We're not 5. We want to make it look like we attempted to make a circle. Okay, it doesn't have to be perfect. I do have a tendency to be a little OCD myself, but okay, somewhat round-ish is what we're looking for. Okay, so now example 3 looks totally different. Okay, here I've got x squared, y squared. I also have x and y. Okay, here I had parentheses, x minus 3 squared, y plus 2 squared. Here I just had x squared and y squared. So this technically just has one x and one y, right? This is an x squared and this is a y squared. And then here's an x squared and a y squared. Well, this is different. It's got an x squared, a y squared, and an x and a y. So when you see that extra set of x and y's, then you're going to have to convert this to vertex form. Okay, so need to change to vertex form, which is the form that our formula is in. Okay, so in order to do that, complete the square. Okay, we learned completing the square when we learned to factor when we did that project before Christmas break. Okay, so that's kind of show up. So the first thing I want to do is I want to take all of my x values, put them together. So x squared plus 4x, and I'm going to leave a blank to make a perfect square, completing the square. Hopefully this rings a bell. Okay, and then we're going to do the same thing with the y. So I'm going to put them together. Y squared minus 8y plus blank equals 16 plus blank plus blank. Now, the difference here is that when we did this the first time, let me bubble this off so it doesn't end up in my work. Okay, when we did this the first time, we only did it once, so we just looked at something like this. X squared plus 4x, and I had to figure out what to put in there to make it a perfect square. Okay, well now we're just going to do the same thing only twice. So I'm going to do it with the x's and then with the y's. Okay, so do it with the x part and then the y part. So let's start with the x part. So x squared plus 4x plus, and we're going to ignore that, plus what would be a perfect squared? Well, if you remember, you take half of the middle and square it. So b over 2 squared. That's a b. b over 2 squared. So half of 4 and square it. So 4 over 2 is 2 squared, which is just 4. Well, that's what I add into that spot. And what I add to the left, I have to add over to the right. Okay, so that's my perfect square for x. Do the same thing for y. Okay, so take half of the middle. That's the key here. Half of the middle. So half of negative 8 squared. Half of negative 8 is negative 4. Negative 4 squared is positive 16. So I'm going to add 16 in here. I'm also going to add it into the other side. Okay, so what I do to one side, I do to the other side. Now, this, go back to the x. I want to factor it because this still doesn't look like our formula up there. So we need to factor this. Okay, now we can target, product, target, sum this. That's fine. Or we can go back to our memory, which says that when we are doing the perfect square, all you have to do is take half of the middle. So we get x, half of 4 is 2 squared. Okay, if you were to target, product, target, sum this, you would get x plus 2, which is x plus 2 squared. But this is the shortcut, which is a whole lot nicer. So same thing here. I've got y squared minus 8y plus 16. So if I want to factor this, it's going to be half of the middle.
My name's Phoebe. If you're still in the building, would you please dial extension 7501? Miss Phoebe, if you're still in the building,
okay, so half of the middle. Half of negative 8 is negative 4. That's how it will always factor. Again, I can target, product, target, sum this. My target product is 16. My target sum is negative 8. So I'm going to get y minus 4, which is y minus 4 squared. It will always be half of the middle. So half of the middle squared is what I add to both sides. Do it for x and for y. And then half of the middle is how it factors. Do it for x, do it for y. So all of that is equal to, if I add that up, 16 plus 4 is 20 plus 16 is 36. Now I'm in vertex form. Now I can pull my center point and my radius out easily. My center is at negative 2, positive 4. Remember to change the sign when it comes out. Negative 2, positive 4. And r squared is 36, which makes r 6. Just take the square root. So change the signs for this, square root for this. Graph that. So when x is negative 2, y is positive 4. And then we're going to go down 6, right 6, left 6, and up 6. Okay, down 6, left 6, right 6, up 6. Connect all those points to give me a nice, pretty circle. Hopefully somewhat, almost, kind of, maybe pretty. Okay, sometimes they're going to look like eggs, not X's. I hope it doesn't look like an X. Sometimes they might look like eggs or something along those lines, but as long as it's relatively close, like that one looks like an egg. But I'm okay with that. It looks like I tried to make a circle, and that's the important part. All right, you have it on your own. Go ahead and hit pause. Give it a shot. Please do it. Please try it. Okay, watching me do it over and over again isn't enough. You need to try these things. Okay, come back, see if you can get the same answer. So, when I come back, x squared, there's nothing being added or subtracted. Okay, I do want to note this. Don't do all of the complete the square stuff. I've got an x squared, and I have parentheses with a y squared. So they're both being squared. I don't have an extra x and y like this one. This one had an x and a y over here. It's got x squared, y squared, and x and y. Okay? So you don't have to do any of that here. Here you just pull the information out. I'm not adding or subtracting anything, so the h value is 0. I am adding a 4, so my k value is negative 4, so I keep saying x and y. Okay, h is 0, y is negative 4. That's all there is to it. That's my center. Radius is just the square root of that number, so the square root of 7, which is approximately 2.6. So when I graph that, when x is 0, y is -4, plot that point, and then I'm going to go up 2.5-ish, right 2.5-ish, left 2.5-ish, and down 2.5-ish. Okay, draw your circle. Okay, and there's my circle. So that is taking equations and pulling information from the equations and graphing them from that. Now, there are times when you're going to be asked, instead of just taking equations and pulling information out, you're going to have to actually write equations, which is that next side. So if you flip it over in your packet, okay, now we're not going to, now they don't give us an equation. I need to find an equation. Okay, that's the key here, find an equation. Now keep in mind, when I find an equation, I need a center and a radius. If you need to make a note, need center and radius. Those are key. Without those, I can't write equations. I need a center and a radius. So if they don't give it to me, I have to find it. Now in this first one, they say find an equation of circle with center -7.3 and radius 10. So they gave me both the things I need. So that's just a matter of plugging it in. That's my H, that's my K, that's my R. Plug it into my formula. Be careful here. It's x minus -7 squared plus y minus 3 squared equals 10 squared. Okay, plugging them all in. So for my equation, we don't leave minus the 7. Minus 7 becomes x plus 7 squared plus y minus 3. That's written as is. And 10 squared is 100. Okay, so this right here would be my equation. They wanted me to graph it also. Here we go. So my center point is at -7, +3. Now my radius is 10. Now all of these aren't going to fit on my tiny little graph here. It's okay, just do what does fit. So when I do my -10, or down 10 rather, okay, there's my point. We're going to go down 10. So we're going to come down here to -7, -7. We're also going to go right 10. So that's going to go to +3, +3. And then when I go up 10, I'm going to end up off my graph, which you can graph if you want to, because that's going to be up here at like 13. So that's somewhere up here, but you don't have to grab it. What you can do is just graph what shows up on your graph. This is, I know it's kind of hard to see on our papers, but this is actually the end of my graph right here. So I would just kind of draw what fits on my graph. And I imagine that it's going to keep on going into this nice pretty circle, which would touch somewhere out here and somewhere way out here. Okay, so all you really have to graph is the stuff that actually fits on your graph itself. Okay, I know the lines are kind of hard to see, but you should be able to kind of sort of see those lines in my graph there. So it should look something like that. Okay, so same thing here. Find the equation of a circle with diameter endpoints of 7, 1 and -5, 9. Well, that's a problem. Okay, I don't have a center nor a radius. Okay, so what they give me when you talk about a circle, diameter endpoints, means they gave me 2 points on either end of a circle. If you think about just a little graph, if I do this, they gave me diameter endpoints. So they gave me a point like here and here where it goes through the middle, right? So if they give me diameter endpoints, I need to find the middle of that to find the center. So if I have 7, 1, and I know a lot of you are already thinking no big deal, I will just look at the points and write it down. Problem is that it's math class, and we want to see work always. What fun would it be if you just did that. We don't want that. We want to see you actually show work. So instead of trying to count it out and figure out where the middle is, because sometimes that middle isn't pretty. Here it's going to be, because we're going to give you nice numbers because we're nice like that. But it's not always going to be pretty, so we need you to know the scale. So instead you use the midpoint formula. Okay, so the center is going to be the midpoint formula. So if you go back to that front side, midpoint formula, which I'm going to put right here. Okay, the midpoint formula says x1 plus x2 over 2, and then y1 plus y2 over 2. This is a coordinate point, that's why there's a comma in between. So when you talk about the center of those 2 points, you add. So 7 plus negative 5 is just minus 5 over 2. It's basically an average. You're averaging the distance. So 1 plus 9 over 2. So x here, it's an arrow. X here is going to be 2 over 2, which is 1. And y is 10 over 2, which is 5. So my point is going to be at 1. 5 is going to be where you're going to find the center. And when you graph that, that looks about right. That looks like it's the center of those 2 points. So now I have a center, but I still need a radius. I have to have center and radius. So if I want to find radius, okay, I want to find the radius. So looking for the radius requires that I do the distance. But distance from what? If I use these 2 points, well, that's the distance from here to here. Okay, well, the distance from here to here, that's not a radius, that's a diameter. Okay, that would be a diameter all the way across. So I have 2 options. One is to find the distance of that diameter and divide it by 2. That's what the radius is. If I know the diameter, the radius is half that distance. Okay, or I use this as part of my point. So I'm going to do it this way. I want my HK and this point here. It doesn't matter which one I use. It's the same distance either way. I'm going to go from the middle to the outside, and that's what a radius is, the distance from the middle to the outside. So I'm going to use my middle point. We'll call this x2, y2, and it doesn't matter. I could have called it x1, y1. I just chose. Okay, so as long as they're both either 2s or both 1s. So I'm going to do x2, y2. And for my distance formula, that's going to be my center point, okay, but I also need the distance from the center point to the outside point, so let's go with this one. So I'm going to use this 7, 1. So 7, 1 I'm going to use as my x1, y1 values, okay, x1, y1 values. And the reason why I marked them off that way is because I'm talking about the distance formula, okay. So if you look back at that front page, here's my distance formula. Okay, we've got the square root of x2 minus x1 squared plus y2 minus y1 squared, where x2, y2 is one of my points, probably my center, and x1, y1 is one of the points on the outside. That would give me the distance from the middle to the outside. So, plug it in. Radius is the square root of x2, we said was 1, minus 7. Notice this is a subtraction, it's the difference. And then I add the difference of y. So 5 minus 1 squared. Those are both squared. Okay, plug those things in. Now just work that out. So 1 minus 7 is negative 6. Negative 6 squared is positive 36. 5 minus 1 is 4. 4 squared is 16. These 2 numbers should be positive. Once you square, you should no longer have negative numbers. So please make sure that you are being careful in your calculator. You have to use parentheses here when you do the squaring, otherwise it's going to be all wrong. Alright, so we get the square root of 52. 36 plus 16 is 52. So that is my radius, okay, which is approximately that is approximately, doesn't say it on here, okay, let me look real fast. Okay, and we'll find the approximate in a second. I gotta wait for this calculator to come, oh, just kidding. So square root of 52 is approximately 7.2. Okay, so approximately 7.2 is what we're looking at. Now, I still have to write an equation. Okay, we haven't written an equation yet. So when I go to write the equation, what I want to see is I got to start with my center, so I'm going to use this. This is my center point, 1, 5. So when I plug it in, this is basically my h and my k. So I get x minus 1 squared, y minus 5 squared. We're still changing the sign when we plug them in. Okay, if I change the sign to take them out, I'm going to change the sign to plug them in, because it's 8x minus h, so x minus 1. Okay, so then that's equal to, this is my r, and I need you to be very careful here. R is equal to the square root of 52, but my formula says r squared. So I need to square both sides to get my r squared. So r squared, which is what my formula wants, is the square root of something squared is just itself. So it's equal to 52, which makes it very, very nice. Do not square 7.2. It's not going to be exact, and I don't like that. Okay? Square root of 52 squared is 52. So this should be your equation. And again, if I were to take my radius, I would square root that, and I would get to the 7.2. So that is correct. Now we just need to finish graphing. So it's approximately 7.2. So we are going to go down 7.2, right 7.2, left 7.2, and up 7.2, which is off my graph. Now keep in mind that I am also going to use these 2 points, because they're points on the outside of my circle. So when I do my circle, it should go through those points as well. See if we can't get a decent looking circle here, maybe. Okay, through those points, through my graph points. Okay, technically my graph stops there, so I could stop there, but if you wanted to finish it off, that is perfectly okay as well, which would look something to that extent. I'm all up in my work. Okay, so that would be my circle. But again, you could have stopped it right here at the end of that graph, I believe. Looks something like that. Some of those lines just faded. But again, don't worry. I will make sure that when I print for your test, that you will be able to see the lines very well, because it'll make it easier. So all you really need is that part of the graph. It should look like such. Alright, now one more that I'm going to do with you, and then you have it on your own to try, and then that'll be the end of circles. So find the equation of a circle with a center of 2, -1, and point on the circle 3, 7. So they give me center this time, which is nice. That's one of my big ones. But I still don't have the radius, so I need to find it. So we're going to go back to the distance formula. Remember, distance is from the middle to the outside. They give us 1 point on the outside. So distance is equal to the square root of, just identify it any way you want, x1, y1, x2, y2. It does not matter which one's 2 and which one's 1, as long as you stay consistent. These are both 2's, these are both 1's, or vice versa. These can be both 2's and those both 1's. Okay, and then it's the difference of x's. So x2 minus x1. So 3 minus 2 squared plus 7 minus -1 comes plus 1 squared, which is going to be 1 squared, and 8 squared, which is 64, so the square root of 65. So this is my, sorry, not d. I keep writing d because it's distance, but this is technically the radius. Okay, so from the middle to the outside, that's the 2 points I'm using, so that's my radius. So writing my equation, I've got my center, so h is 2, so we go x minus 2, make sure you change it, squared plus y, make sure one of these is xy also, a lot of people miss that up, one's x, one's y, y plus 1 squared is equal to, square root of 65 squared is 65, you have to square it to put it in, square root it to take it out, square it to put it in. Alright, so that is approximately 8.1, I believe. square root of 65 is 8.1. So let's go ahead and graph. Center's at -2, +2, -1. Plot your point. And then I have a distance of 8.1. So here we go. So we go just past 10 here. Just past 6. 8.1 would be 7.1 up. 8.1 down would take me to 9.1 down. And then just draw your circle. Okay, so there is your circle. Circle-ish. Alright, you have it on your own. Please pause the video, see if you can't do the on your own first. Okay, these ones are a little more difficult than the other ones, so make sure you try them. Alright, once you have tried them and you're trying to check your answers, if I find an equation of a circle with diameter endpoints at -5, 4, and 310, okay, so they didn't give me radius, they didn't give me center, so I need both. Center is what, and radius is what. I need both. Okay, so I need both. So I'm going to start with my center. That's the easiest one to go for first. Center is the midpoint between two outside points. Just add -5 plus 3 over 2. It's the average, right? And 4 plus 10 over 2, which yields -2 over 2 is -1, and 14 over 2 is +7. So there is my center point. I can go ahead and write that as part of my equation if I want. X plus 1 squared plus y minus 7 squared equals the radius squared, but I don't have a radius yet, so let's find the radius. How do I find the radius? Very simple. It is the distance from the center to one of my outside points, and it doesn't matter which one. I'm going to use the -5, 4. Okay, so I'm going to call this x1, y1, and I'm going to call my center point x2, y2, and I'm going to plug into that distance formula. So for the radius, it is the square root of x2 minus x1, so minus -5 becomes +5 squared, plus 7 minus 4, y2 minus y1 squared. This is just plugging straight into that distance formula. Okay, when you do that, I get 4 squared is 16, and 7 minus 4 is 3 squared, which is 9, so 16 plus 9. So I get the square root of 25. Now let me say this, if you got a radius of 100, okay, or a radius of 10 rather, what happened was that you went from here to here. Okay, well those are endpoints, so let me graph this out real fast. So here I'm going to get 25. Okay, so if I were to graph this out, if I did x is -5, y is +4, that is there-ish, and then x is 3, y is 10, which is up here. Okay, well when you look at these, if you found the distance from here to here, well that's not a radius, because my center point lies in here. So what you found, if you found the distance from here all the way across, you found the diameter. So if you found the diameter to be the square root of 100, which was 10, then it's simple. If I want to find the radius from there, it's just half of that. So half of 10 is 5. And then when I plug it in, 5 squared gets me back to the 25. So be very careful there. If you did the distance from here to here, that is the diameter, not the radius. So you would have to cut that in half. Okay, so now we just need to finish graphing, so we're going to go down 5, 2, 3, 4, 5, down 5, right 5, left 5, and up 5 is off my graph, so I'm just going to fill in what I can here, doing my circular connect the dot skills here. Okay, so that is what that circle should look like on my graph. Remember, my graph kind of stops here, so that's the top part of my graph. Okay, so that is what we are looking at. That is how you take information, plug it into the circle. Again, the final answer there was x plus 1 squared plus y minus 7 squared equals 25. It's 25 because the radius was 5. 5 squared is positive 25. All right, good luck.